scrape or download data from the web using R programmatically, import the data, do a couple of calculations, create some variables, analyze it just slightly, show the death rates, and we'll make a data table. We'll create an HTML site that you can actually publish and an actual plot that you can look at, and make it somewhat interactive where you can at least show the code if you want to be transparent or not. So this is for anybody that has no programming experience. Yes, there's going to be things that you don't know and you'll have to play with and Google. However, if you just follow my lead, you'll get to at least play with the data enough to get an understanding of what's going on. I think anybody will find this useful without any programming experience whatsoever. That being said, the first two criteria that you have to have is you have to download R. It's just called R. Just type in download R, and it's free online, and then download RStudio next. Download RStudio after you've already installed R. So as you can see on my screen here, R version 3.61 is the version I'm using. You should download something very similar, and again, install R, and it will do nothing except do stuff in the background for you. Then download RStudio, which is what you see in front of you here. This is my console. This is my environment where I store variables into RAM. And here is where I can store files or get to files, see my plots, download packages. We'll get into all that in a second. So that's step one. Step two, we're going to create a new project. So we're going to go to File, New Project, and we'll click on New Directory and New Project. We'll give this a name called COVID-19. Anything you really want to call it, just make sure you know where you're saving it. I'm saving it on my desktop. It's not that important yet or during this tutorial, but it will be in the future if you continue with your R journey. So create the project, and you'll see nothing's really changed except we're actually in a project. So we have certain directories set and things like that, but don't worry about under the hood stuff yet. Now we want to create a new R Markdown notebook file. And I like the notebook files because they're a little bit more usable. So click on File, New File, and this time we're going to go all the way down to R Notebook. So click on R Notebook. Now you see all this pre-template stuff here. We can get rid of all of this. So let's just highlight from all the way down from line 18 all the way up to 6. We'll keep the actual YAML code at the top. So that's called YAML code. It's yet another Markdown language. So don't worry about it. It's something that's going to be rendered into an HTML file later. Let's go ahead and just change the title though. So keep the quotes, but we're going to call it, my first COVID analysis, whatever you want to call it. And we want to have the output as the HTML notebook. That's what's going to give us a little bit more transparency and ways to give it a narrative. All right, so we're not actually coding yet. We're just going to put a little bit of Markdown language first to describe what we're doing. The first thing we want to do is probably put a header saying, hey, what are we doing here with this website? So with that, we would use hashtags. One hashtag is like a heading one in like Microsoft Word. So you're actually creating a heading. You can't see it yet because this is just Markdown language, but that's what that means. So I'm going to call this, check out my COVID analysis, whatever you want to call it, right? Then you can type in more words and say, this is the approach I used. I got the data from, and now it's important to cite your source from this source, right? And we can do, we can actually put code in here. So I can actually do colon. Now to put the actual source, first I'll show you the source. That'll help a little bit. So let me go to the website, and I'll obviously give this to you. So this site is the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. And I have the URL here. I'm going to copy that. That's what I'm going to give to you, so don't worry about memorizing that. If you scroll down just a little bit, though, you have all these download links. And you have a download in CSV. You have all kinds of download links. I'm going to put the generic page here, though. I'm not going to go directly to the CSV just because it might update. But I think this page might be pretty stagnant. Now, if by chance this page is no longer there, I actually have the data stored on my personal website, which I'll also link so that you can still do this tutorial whether or not this site is still up and running or not. So I copied that, and we're just going to put it here. We'll actually do the YAML code. So to do that, I'd put it in brackets. So open and close bracket, And in the bracket, you want what you want to be spelled out. So European Center for Disease Control and Prevention, whatever the acronym is, I'm just making this up. And then directly after the bracket, you put an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis. And you can put in your actual website without any quotes. So I'm going to Control V or Command V on that. Depends if you're a Mac or a PC. This does work for Mac and PC, so same scenarios. Now don't worry about what that looks like just yet, but no, that's going to be like an interactive link that you can click on when you build your actual web page. Cool, we've got the source. Now let's actually get some code going. So let's do another header and say import data. So in this section, I'm going to import data. So we can also cite a source here too, you know, or we can just say this is where we import data. Simple as that. Now we're done with the Markdown language. We're going to use some actual R code to import this. So to insert an R chunk, which is to tell this when to actually interpret something as code, you can do Alt-Command-I, Alt-Command-I. Wow. I switched between a MacBook and a PC, and my shortcut keys are just terrible right now because of that. Anyways, you see these little backticks here? These are not the apostrophe. That's to your, your pinky finger. It's not that. These backticks are the number or the character to the left of the number 1 on your keyboard, most likely. So those are backticks. So 3 backticks followed by this bracket R bracket, curly brace I should call it, and then ending by 3 backticks. You can see it even changed the color on my integrated development environment, my IDE, the RStudio. So I know in between these is where my R code goes. Now, how do we start this? Well, luckily, if you go back to the site, if you scroll down, you'll actually see download the data in more formats. We're not trying to download this manually. We want to do it programmatically. Lucky for us, they actually provide a script for downloading the CSV file into our software. So simple as this. We're going to copy from this little hashtag looking thing all the way down to where the data is. So copy from here down to the data, Command C or Control C. And I kept this little hashtag, and I'll tell you what that is in just a moment. Let's go back to R. So in between here on line 15, I'm going to do Command V, and you can see I've pasted the code in here. Now, that little hashtag right here just means, because it's inside of the R chunk now, it's different from when it's over here where it's R Markdown language. I know it's a little confusing, but just bear with me here. The hashtag is just a comment within the code, because you don't actually have to have all of this. This is just optional. All right, so we have this code. We don't actually have to know much about it, except for that it does read the CSV file, which is a comma-separated value, basically an Excel sheet, columns and rows, into my RStudio for me. It's nice that they have that. However, you might run into problems. So the problem that you're going to run into is on lines 16 and 17, you have 2 libraries. Library utils comes with the R. So when you downloaded R itself, you've got that. You're all set. Now, HTTTR does not come with base R, what you downloaded. So we have to install that package. So what we do is we go over here to Packages, click on Packages, click on Install, and then you'll see this dialog pop up, and you just want to type in HTTTR, and then make sure that it says repository CRAN here. And I would not mess with the default that comes with the install to library directory here. Don't mess with the default unless you really know what you're doing with R. And make sure install dependencies is checked, because if this particular library, HTTTR, which is a helper, it's going to help us do our work, might need other helpers, and it'll automatically download those helpers that HTTTR needs in order to work. So then click on Install. I'm not going to install it because I already have it, but it should take roughly, depends on your connection, less than 30 seconds, most likely. Okay, so that's installed, and then when you do that, what you want to do is this little play button over here to the right. It says Run Current Chunk. You want to use that to run the entire chunk, that chunk of R code that we just created. So I'm going to click on it, and you'll see this little green bar on the left. That means it's executed those lines of code. If you have a red bar, that means there's an error somewhere. So if you get an error at this point, you should sit back and try to figure out what went wrong. Did you actually install the package? Was there an error? It really should run smooth, but if you did run into something, there's troubleshooting that's probably not really part of this tutorial. But what you see over here in the global environment, I have now two variables set. I have a data and I have a TF. Now the TF is a temporary file, but again, we don't have to worry about it because that was given to us from the actual site. So kind of ignore that. It's just a temporary location to store information before you decide to save it permanently. Anyways, the data, it shows us right here, we have 8304 observations, so 8304 rows of data, and 10 variables, 10 features, 10 columns. If you click on data, luckily this IDE gives us a display of what the data looks like, so we can kind of get a handle of what it looks like before we start playing with it and messing with it. So let's just recap what's across here. We have the date rep, whatever that means, probably the date recorded, the day, the month, the year. I'm not interested in all of this data right now, but I'm just going to walk through it. We have cases, deaths, the countries and territories, GE old. That's probably some standardized way to abbreviate the country territory code, same thing. Population data 2018, but we're not going to focus on that. We're really going to focus on cases and deaths in this. It is now on you to figure out and go back and research what all these mean. This is a very simple tutorial. Let's X this out. And remember though, these are all lowercase and it's cases, deaths, countries, and territories. I'm going to close this out and let's continue down the road now. So this appeared, but we don't need it. You can either X it out or you can just click on line 24 where those ticks are, the last line I have, or any line for that matter. So I can go to 26. Let's do that. Now we're going to do something different. We're going to create a data table that shows this. And I'll show you that. So in other words, we're going to do another header and we're going to call it, let's just show data table, hit enter, and what we're going to do is we're going to insert another chunk. Now does anybody remember what to do? Was it Command Alt I? First try, not bad on that one. Okay, so Command Alt I or Control Shift I. I'm not sure what the shortcut is on a PC, but you can also just manually type in 3 backticks and then the curly brace R. And remember the backtick is to the left of the 1, not a quote, not a single quote. That'll definitely be troublesome if you get those mixed up. All right, so we want to add a couple more libraries. I'm going to add library called dplyr and another library called DT, data table. And you probably don't have either one of those installed already, so remember what you have to do. Click on packages over here, install, and just type in DT. You'll see it populate automatically because it's in the CRAN library. That's like an official repository for these libraries. So you can expect them to be safe, updated, and relevant. So DT, click on install. Same thing, once that's done, do dplyr, dplyr install. I've already got them installed. So I can do, now I ran the entire chunk with this play button before. What you could do is you could put your cursor on the end of the line, or anywhere on the line for that matter, and you can either do Control Enter or Command Enter if you have a Mac. So Command Enter, it'll run that particular line only, and then go down to the next line. And as you can see, I've got a little bit of information down here, but it didn't turn red. These are warnings, and those warnings are really not relevant to this tutorial. So library DT, let's do the same thing, Command Enter. So I ran them separate. That's fine. I can run them over and over again. It'll just overwrite. I can run the entire chunk again. So don't worry about that. But do know that if something that you rely on is above there and you make changes, but you didn't rerun it, it will affect and propagate down. So you might want to rerun the entire thing. Now that we have the libraries loaded, we can actually use this. So I'm going to create another data frame, it's called. So basically another spreadsheet, if you will. I'm going to call it EDF. And I'm going to set it so this arrow says, hey, whatever you do to the right-hand side, save it to this variable called EDF. And when I do run that command, the EDF will be over here in the environment. So I already have a variable called data over here, right? It's because, oh, I forgot to mention that. So this line of code is called, is the one that we downloaded from the web. We read the CSV file using this command here, and it stored it into a variable called data. Now we looked at the data just a minute ago. It's right here. So it got the name data because we controlled that by putting it in line 23, even though we copied and pasted it from the website, just to catch you up on that. So I want to take the data that we just imported, and I want to do stuff with it. I want to group it by country and territory. Control-Shift-M will do this pipe operator, and on a PC, it's probably the same thing, but I'm not 100% sure. Control-Shift-M will give this pipe operator, and basically what you're looking at is say, hey, take this data, pipe it, like you're going to pipe a water through or pipe like a big vat of water through a pipe. You're doing something to it. You're changing it maybe, right? So we want to pipe it to this group by function. So group by, and we want to group it by countries and territories. So type that in. And if you start typing it in far enough, it'll give you an option. And once you find the name of the variable you want, you can hit tab if you want, and it'll autocomplete. And you know that it's correct and spelled correctly that way. So group by this. I want to group it by that. It's almost like the English language. Now I'm going to do Command-Shift-M again for pipe. I'm going to pipe that into something else. I want to create a variable now out of thin air. There's no variable in there called death rate, and I'm going to add that in there. So I'm going to use this function called mutate, and the group by and mutate are all coming from the dplyr package, by the way. So we're going to do mutate, and I'm going to create a variable. What do I want to call it? Death rate. So I'm going to call it death rate, and that's just my naming convention. You can call it whatever you want. But now I'm going to set it equal. I'm going to set it equal to a sum of all the deaths. Of all the deaths divided by the sum of all the cases. And now I know that deaths and cases were part of that original data set, so I can use them. And sum is just a function in R that you can sum all of that entire, it's going to sum the entire column, except it's going to group it by, because we have the group by here, group it by countries and territories. All right, so once we have that, we're going to pipe that into, no, we're not going to pipe that. That's it. That's all we want to do is add that one variable. So I'm going to do Command Enter on that. Make sure we get no errors. If you have an error, see if you have a misspelling or something. We can look at EDF. Now you can see I have 11 variables here. And if I click on it, you're going to see a death rate on the right-hand side right here, and it's a 0.02. Yeah, you can multiply it by 100 if you want and make it a percent. This tutorial is just a bare bones, so let's just go to another country to make sure that the numbers change, and they do. Albania has a different percentage. Okay, we can close this now. We have that. We have the death rate. Next step, I'm going to move this down here so we have a little bit more room. And just for your FYI, this is the R notebook. This is the console again. This is the environment. All right, so we have EDF. Now let's create a data table that displays this nicely for your audience. All right, so in that case, we're going to use that DT library. We're going to call it data table. We're going to call the function called data table, so it's built in. And as you can see, if I put the parenthesis there, you see this little yellow pop-up. It's probably pretty confusing if you don't know R, but with this part, I would recommend maybe just copying exactly what I have and modifying it using a couple of Google searches. So inside of here, I want to bring in my data set, so EDF, and then I want to bring in something called extensions, and I'm going to set that equal to buttons so that we can export them, and we can export them as CSV or PDF or Excel, whatever we want. So then we'll do options equals a list. I know this is like a little complicated. I'm going to hit enter now. Notice the auto population of my right parentheses. That could confuse some people if you're not careful. DOM equals, now don't get me wrong, I don't memorize this either. I'm using a reference right now for this, because once you set it and you make it the way you want, you usually just copy and paste it and change the set of data that goes in, comma, buttons equals, and now I'm going to describe the buttons I want. I want the copy button. Now these all have to mean something, and they do, to the data table function and the DT library. So I want copy, CSV, Excel, make sure they're comma separated, EXEL, PDF, and print. That's what I have. Then I should have two more parentheses at the end, and that's that. Now, white space doesn't matter. The parentheses will tell it when. If you move the mouse to the right of the last parenthesis, you'll see the first parenthesis in that statement highlight, so you can see where it says data table. So that's how you know, oh, okay, they match. We're good to go. So we have a data table now. So now let's go ahead and play this entire chunk here. And lucky for us, it's all green. We don't know what it's really doing yet, but luckily this notebook file that we have actually gives you a kind of a display of what it's going to look like. It's this. So it's got these pagination or pagination, whatever you want to call it. You can sort it by different things if you click on it. And you'll notice to the right, there's probably more to the right, but you can't see it from this view. So don't worry about that yet. What I want to show you now is how to, well, let's first save it. So Command S or File Save. I'm going to do Command S. First time saving, you have to name it. So I'm going to name it, intro to COVID, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Click Save. Now it's saved. Now we're going to render this. Now there's two ways to render it. The shortcut would be Control-Shift-K. And if you want to go down here to the console, which is down here, we can tell the console, hey, render this into an HTML file. Let's take a look at it. Let's take a peek. So let's do R Markdown. We're going to say, hey, take this R Markdown, this notebook file you have, this R Markdown language, and render it into an HTML file for me. Thankfully for the knitter package, but you don't have to worry about that unless you don't have the knitter package. And we just called it COVID. If you put it in parentheses and you start typing in COVID and hit tab, you can have a little drop down to help you out. We want the RMD file, the R Markdown file. So intro to COVID in quotes .rmd, and then hit enter. You'll see it's going to churn and do some things, and while it's doing that, it's creating the HTML file and says output created. Now if you don't have, if that doesn't work, there's a chance that you need to install a package called knitr. But if you downloaded the latest version of RStudio, it should come with it. But KNITR is what you might have to download. I highly doubt you'll have to do that, because if you downloaded the latest version, you should be good to go. Click over here on Files, and let's go down to what just happened. So what happened was intro to covid.nb.html was just created. The NB just stands for notebook. Right click on it and go to, just left click on it and go to Open in Web Browser. Now you can open it in the editor if you'd like, but the editor has its own browser and it's not going to be the same as Chrome or IE. So you want to view it in your own native browser so that you know for a fact it works the way you want, just to be extra careful about it. Here's our output. So we have all this code here, that we downloaded. We have show table, we have all this code, and we have our death rate, we have our pagination or pagination. And you can see that as I move the mouse, it kind of highlights the row that I'm on, and I can export, copy, do all these different things. So if I want to export the CSV or to PDF, you just click on CSV, and you'll see down here for me, it just downloaded it. Pretty awesome, pretty cool. You can also hide the code if you'd like, if you want to present it without the code. And you can actually have global options up here where you can actually download this RMD file or hide or show all code, etc., etc. So that's your first taste. Finally, let's scroll down just a tad bit more. We're on line 41. I'm going to hit enter a couple times. And when you do that, it usually disappears the stuff above or causes changes. Don't worry about that. All right, so the last thing we want to do is create a graph, just to even things out with a little table and a graph, and then you're on your own. So we have graph 1. We want to go down and create another chunk, so Alt-Command-I, insert. And I'm gonna go ahead and paste the code in there because it's a lot to kind of come up with without references. And you can I'll walk you through it, but you can change it accordingly. So what you'll notice is I have a library called the ggplot2 there. So you'll have to install that if you don't have it. Packages, install ggplot2, and just click on install. You should be good to go. So now what this chunk of code is doing is I'm going to walk you through it. Let's go ahead and hit play first. And so it creates a chart that we're going to have, and it takes that EDF data frame, the set of data that we've created with our death rates and all that. It's going to pipe it with that pipe operator right here. That's Command-Shift-M. you can get that as a shortcut, or you can type in % greater than %. That's the pipe operator. It's going to take that data, pipe it into a filter. And what's this filter going to do? It's going to say, hey, only accept deaths that are greater than 100. So it'll actually take this statement here, this conditional statement, deaths greater than 100, and say, only when that's true, keep the data. So it's actually going to filter the EDF data down for us. Once it filters it, it's going to pipe that output into a new input. That input's going to be the group by. The group by is, I want to group everything by countries and territories. So every angle that you look at this data will be viewed in that perspective as countries and territories grouped together. Now we're going to pipe that, so it's continuously piping things into more functions, into a summarize function, because I'm curious to know how many deaths they actually have total per country, because don't forget, it's grouped by the countries and territories. So after you group it, tell me the summary of what's inside of this function here, which is I created a variable called deaths total, came out of thin air, does not exist yet until I run this statement. I'm going to set it equal to the sum, so I'm going to add up all of the deaths. Now remember, deaths is part of the table. We have a deaths column. So add up all the deaths, but not all the deaths. All the deaths per country that are greater than 100. And then we pipe that into a ggplot. That's the actual plotting mechanism that we're going to use. And you don't have to know too much about it, but we need an aesthetic to map to the plot, because a ggplot is like a blank canvas. And then the AES is aesthetic. We're going to say, hey, let the x-axis equal the countries and territories. I want that. But again, don't forget, we're only doing the deaths that are greater than 100. And then we're going to add to that, so that notice the plus and not the pipe. So with ggplot, anything with ggplot, and you want to add layers to it, you would add it with the addition symbol. We're going to add a geometric point. So the actual points that you see on the plot is what we're adding. And what are the points? Well, the y we're going to call the deaths total that we just created up here, or we're about to create when we hit the go button, right? And then I flip the coordinate axes, because otherwise you would have the countries along the x-axis, and they would kind of blend together, overlap, and it's just not going to be aesthetically pleasing. So that's what that is. Before we go any further, though, I want to show you a tab set, so we can add a little functionality to this. We have graph 1. Let's do a double header, graph 2, and, oh, I'm sorry, we'll call it graph A. So graph 1, graph A, or we can even just call it A, it doesn't matter. So this is A, and we're going to copy all of this, and I'm going to go ahead and Command C it, come down to line 58, Command V. We'll call this graph B, and we don't need to load the library more than once, so we can delete this. Now we have the same code here, but instead of death total, let's do cases total. So I'm just going to replace this with cases total, and I'm going to make that the sum of the cases, and then I'm also going to plot the cases total. So it'll be somewhat similar. And the filter, let's see what it looks like. The filter, yeah, because it's still going to be the deaths. It's only going to filter. But notice the numbers on the x-axis. You have somewhere around 200,000, somewhere 200,000 deaths for the United States of America at this time. So that sounds about right, actually. So I think everything is good. You'd have to obviously double check all that. Now let's go ahead and save this, Command S, and rerun the chunk, and I'll show you a couple more things and we'll call it quits. So our Markdown render, and this is called Intro to COVID RMD. Let that run. Okay, so click on the Intro to COVID nb.html, open in web browser, or view in web browser, and you'll see it's the same thing we had. We have the data table here. We have graph 1, then notice graph A is slightly smaller, and then we have graph B, so they've got different headers, right? But we can do better than that. Let's go back to our code, and I want to show you what tab set does. So if we do go all the way to graph 1, and then hit a space and do a curly brace open, which is right there, and do dot tab set, and then close the curly brace if it didn't automatically do that for you. What that does is it'll make tabs into anything that has a higher header by 1 level. So this number 2 hashtag is 1 level higher, and so isn't this one, so they're both being their own tabs. Command S, save that again, and let's go down here, click the up arrow, and you'll get the latest command that you ran, hit enter again. Let's run that one more time and I'll show you the difference. All right, so let's reopen this up, view in web browser. And as you scroll down, you will see here's our first graph on graph A tab and then graph B. So there's two different tabs, two different axes. Now you have both. So you can show this off. It's not elaborate, but it's a good start. I think this will get you started with maybe your love for R and statistics and predictive analysis. So what your homework is going to be, of course, is to, Google a little bit about ggplot and create some different plots. Maybe do that mutate function that we have up here where we're creating new variables right here. So this mutate, I'm creating a death rate. Maybe come up with your own rates. For example, we have population, so maybe you could do something with density. So you can do a mutate. What you do is you would do Control-Shift-M, pipe that into another mutate, add the variable name equals, and what do you want it to be? You could do other functions besides sum. I'm not going to show you how to do that because that's some of the research you have to do. However, that being said, I think this is a good start. So have fun with it and leave me some comments and whatnot, and I will see you guys in the next one.